Welcome to Academia Unlocked, a special series from BookTok for BookTok with Jac and Amy, where we take one classic work and explore it through a 4-part literary journey, moving from understanding the text to deep analysis to cultural interpretation, and finally to collective reader meaning. This is Jac.
And I'm Amy, longtime friends, readers, and co-hosts. And between the two of us, we have over 13 years of academic literary training, including both bachelor's in creative writing, as well as master's degrees. Our goal with this series is to bring academic-level literary discussion into a space that feels accessible, thoughtful, and genuinely curious, without losing the depth that makes these works so enduring.
Academia Unlocked isn't just talking about a book, it's about learning how to read, interpret, and question it in new ways. Think of this series as stepping into a guided seminar where we explore not only what the story says, but how and why it continues to resonate across time. Each book is broken into 4 episodes, each building on the last.
We are currently discussing Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Last week, we discussed Pride and Prejudice as you would in a college seminar. This week, we're examining the portrayal of Pride and Prejudice in various forms of media, movies, but not music.
No music for this one, sadly.
No.
So, Pride and Prejudice has been adapted more times than almost any novel in English language. And that is internet. You go and confirm that. But it feels right. Between film, television, web series, Bollywood, Mormon rom-coms, YouTube vlogs, this story absolutely refuses to stay in 1813, and I am grateful for that.
Never mind all the different novel adaptations as well. And this isn't an accident, because as we talked about in episodes 1 and 2, Pride and Prejudice is built on a question that every generation has to answer for itself. What does it actually mean to see someone clearly? What do we mistake for character? And what do we mistake for love?
Every adaptation answers those questions differently, or some not at all. Sometimes they just choose one of those. And today we're not asking whether they got Austen, quote unquote, right, not the way like we had it with Wuthering Heights. We're asking something I feel like is a little bit more interesting. What does each variation think this novel is actually about? Because that is going to tell you everything about that adaptation, about the era that it was made, and honestly, about us. Us, not just me and Amy, but us as you, the consumer of this media. So we're going to go into segment 1. And I will start segment 1. Again, this is a new series. We're easing into this. Before we get into the adaptations themselves, I want to give you a framework for how to watch Pride and Prejudice, all of these various adaptations. Because most people watch adaptations and ask the wrong questions. Like for me personally, that main question I ask is, was this the right Darcy? You know what? Every Darcy I have approved of. And some more so than others, but each one, it doesn't take much for me to be angry.
On board.
Yeah, it takes a lot for me to be angry. It takes so little for me to be happy. So the wrong question could be, is this a faithful adaptation of the book? Versus a much richer question we could be asking ourselves is, how does this variation reimagine Darcy and Elizabeth? Because the two of them together are essentially the whole point of this novel. Change how you build Darcy and change what Pride and / or Prejudice could mean. And then the same thing for Elizabeth. You change her and that changes Pride and / Prejudice. And if you change both of them, you have now completely written a whole different thesis. And honestly, some of these variations really highlight some more than others, I would say.
Okay, we're going to track 2 things as we go through each adaptation. Who is Darcy in this particular adaptation? Meaning what kind of person, what kind of flaw, what kind of growth? And on the complementary side, who is Elizabeth? What is she fighting for? What is she blind to? And what does her arc cost her? And by arc, I mean character arc. Then we'll ask, what do these 2 characterizations together, Darcy and Elizabeth, tell us about what this adaptation thinks the novel Pride and Prejudice is about?
In Pride and Prejudice, Elizabeth and Darcy are flawed in very symmetrical ways. They mirror one another. It's complementary to one another. It's part of their love story. So Darcy has a lot of pride. He is socially superior and uses that essentially as an emotional armor. And again, our boy's got a touch of the tism, and I will argue that every single adaptation shows that. And for Elizabeth, she's got a lot of prejudice, intellectual confidence. That's what she uses as emotional armor. Again, but you can also, Elizabeth also has pride and Darcy has prejudice, but we're going to use those as the two main ones for right now. And both have to dismantle their own defensiveness before they can get to each other. Both of them have to humble themselves because neither one gets it right. And adaptations almost always soften one of these arcs. Like one doesn't do the other one as dirty, and which one they soften tells you a lot about that adaptation. So if Darcy's pride is a bit more romanticized, the novel becomes a love story about, taming a difficult man, which I don't hate. However, if Elizabeth's prejudice is minimized, the novel then becomes a story about a perfect woman waiting for a man to deserve her. I personally can relate. Austen wrote neither of those, right? Neither of those was her goal. However, adaptations focusing on those two aspects have been made.
In some adaptations, Elizabeth's greatest crime are the people she's related to.
Yeah.
Which is not what the novel is saying. The novel is not minimizing her family, but certain adaptations allow both Darcy and Elizabeth to say, if it weren't for the family, she would be perfect.
Yep.
Now think of this like comparative literature. We're not grading the quality of the adaptations on a rubric. We're reading them the way we'd read two different critical essays on the same topic or on the same text. We're asking what each essay, if an adaptation is an essay, we're asking what each one sees, what each one misses, and what the differences reveal about how our culture's understanding of the story shifts. So before we really dive into these adaptations, I want to anchor us with a quote that comes from the book that I think captures the spirit of this episode. Quote, "The more I see of the world, the more I am dissatisfied with it, and every day confirms my belief of the inconsistency of all human characters and of the little dependence that can be placed on the appearance of merit or sense." This is, in a lot of ways, Austen's own thesis using Elizabeth Bennet's voice. The appearance of merit versus actual merit. And every adaptation of Pride and Prejudice decides how seriously it wants to take that thesis. Some adaptations make appearance versus actual merit the whole point of the story. Some like to bury it under the love story between Darcy and Elizabeth, and others translate it into a completely different language altogether.
The first adaptation we're going to talk about, for me, is like, it's my ground zero, right? Like that, it is the thing to which all adaptations are built upon, even though there are so many that were made before this. But that is the BBC 1995 miniseries with Colin Firth and Jennifer Ehle. We all know it as the Colin Firth version. Poor Jennifer. But Colin Firth plays Darcy as genuinely difficult. He is reserved, he is socially awkward, and not at all immediately romantic, despite what we might think. Just try to think about the first time you might have watched this if you did not know about Pride and Prejudice. Like, I think I watched the movie, or the BBC. I actually know for a fact I watched the BBC long before I read it. So
me too.
He was my introduction to Darcy. And Firth's Darcy, Colin Firth's Darcy, his pride is a real flaw. It is not sexy. It's not quirky. It is absolutely a flaw that he interprets with Darcy. And that's really one of the closest things to Austen's original Darcy and the original text. Now, let's look at the lake scene. That is a very famous. Darcy goes into the lake and he comes out and he's all sexy and wet. And that's not in the novel. That is absolutely invented for adaptation. And never have I been less angry about deviating from the original text.
Yeah.
So Darcy emerging wet from the lake is now iconic. It is just a token in the Austen zeitgeist, really. And it's often, like, I think sometimes treated or confused like Austen wrote that herself. I don't think she could socially acceptably be like, and then he got out of the lake wet. But what does its invention argue? And that is his hidden vulnerability needs to be made more visible on screen. So while this is like a sexy moment, this is a very stripped down, humanized moment of Darcy, right? He is no longer this like tall, stoic figure. He's a guy who just wants to get into his lake and swim because it's hot. And he's, really ruffled and still thinking about Elizabeth.
And blowing off steam.
He just wants to blow off some steam in his lake. It's probably honestly really dirty. But the novel reveals this itself through Pemberley and his changed behavior. You're not going to get that kind of detailed in movie and screen adaptations. So BBC needed to make this more of an exterior interpretation and understanding and stripping down of this character. So his transformation is earned gradually because you've got 6 glorious hours and the format allows it to be real and not sudden. But even with 6 hours, you're going to need these slight variations and tweaks from the original text.
Now, let's look at Elizabeth in the BBC miniseries. Jennifer Ehle's, I think that's how you pronounce her last name, I could be wrong. Jennifer Ehle's Elizabeth is one who probably most closely tracks with Austen's version of Elizabeth in Pride and Prejudice. And I think she's really worth spending time on. Her wit is very cutting. Everything is tongue-in-cheek with her. Her errors are played out as actual errors. They're not endearing mistakes like it might come across in some other Elizabeths. When she reads Darcy's letter and she has her crisis, it plays as genuine devastation. Like, she is really upset by it. It's not a romantic awakening. The BBC version trusts that Elizabeth's intellectual humiliation, that's what it is, it's a humbling, a humiliation, is the emotional climax of the story. Not all adaptations do that. In the BBC version, Elizabeth's misjudgments have weight. She's not positioned as simply right and always right until Darcy catches up to her. She has to face the consequences of her misjudgment, and she feels that deeply. We can then argue that the 1995 miniseries preserves Austen's symmetry in Darcy and Elizabeth. Both characters are wrong. We know that they are wrong, and both believe they are correct or want to be correct and learn otherwise.
The BBC 1995 miniseries, in case you forgot that's what we're talking about, what does this adaptation believe Pride and Prejudice to be? And looking at it, this is our interpretation of what its interpretation is that the BBC version thinks that Pride and Prejudice is about moral and intellectual growth in both directions simultaneously. It trusts Austen's irony more than a lot of other adaptations. I think that it really leans into her humor a lot more. It's more faithful to her humor. It doesn't rely on other types of humor. Not that the other ones are wrong. We'll get into that, but some of them are a little bit more slapstick. And that faithfulness is itself an argument that the text does not need to be romanticized in order to be compelling. It just needs room to breathe in the form of 6 hours.
Which I'm not going to argue against.
Love it.
I mean, the only liberties it really takes, if you think about it, lake scene, and then the lack of an epilogue, essentially, since it stops at a wedding.
I have one note. I have yet to see any adaptation show that Bingley and Darcy and the Bennet sisters all had dinner more frequently with each other, but in between balls. Because the way that they make it look like is that they only see each other at these events and there were dinners in between that were just summarized.
Oh, yeah, that's fair.
That's all. But that's not just this one. That's every single one.
Yeah, that's every single one.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to bring another quote into this before I close down the BBC version. Quote, "She began now to comprehend that he was exactly the man who, in disposition and talent, would most suit her." It's, you spot the guy matching you. You don't want them to be the perfect person. The novel gives us this quietly, this concept through narration, and it's almost clinical in its precision sometimes, like the way that it's described and some of the scenes that it plays out. And the BBC gives us this lake wet shirt scene and also like the charged eye contact, like any type of like staring and longing. It isn't even an adaptation if you don't have Darcy staring longingly at Elizabeth, right?
Right. And she getting like
uncomfortable, like he's just
very
trying to stare me down and scare me, but in actuality he's like, these are my fuck me eyes. Both communicates the same turning point through completely different means. Fidelity to meaning versus fidelity to method, if that makes sense. You guys, did you want to like interpret what I said to make it more?
Yeah, we're trying to say is that, again, the lake scene is the internal made external because we don't get the witty narrator when we're in the movie unless you literally have a voiceover. And so the lake scene followed by basically Colin Firth coming out of the lake and Elizabeth being right there, and them making eye contact is so charged that it is equivalent to this one quote of the narrator saying, she now understood, which is hilarious because it's like, oh, now that I see him naked, I do now
I really
understand.
do feel like we are a good match. Like, honestly.
Honestly, I relate.
Yeah. Thank you for breaking that down in a way that makes more sense. And it earns its romance, because it earns the moral growth that makes romance possible. Like, I really freaking love this adaptation. I've already watched it once this year. It's April 1st. I'm going to have to watch it again. I did the first round of taxes with it, and I'll probably do my second round of taxes with it.
Nice. Okay, we are now going to move into what we like to call the Keira Knightley 2005 version of Pride and Prejudice. Woo! This is how we make up for the fact that the 1995 version is called the Colin Firth version.
Yep. Yep.
Now, Darcy in this version, played by Matthew McFadden, makes Darcy come across as very overwhelmed from the beginning of the movie. Matthew McFadden plays Darcy as a man already losing the battle with his feelings, which is kind of the inverse of Austen's Darcy, who's convinced he has feelings under control, that he's perfectly rational until he realizes, oh, nothing about me was ever rational to begin with. Whereas in this case, Matthew McFadden seems to be aware he's losing control from the start. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the infamous hand flex scene that we all know and love. Oof. Again, not in the novel. This is when Darcy helps Elizabeth into a carriage when she and her family are leaving Netherfield. After Jane's sick, her mom and sisters come. They all leave in a carriage. He helps her into the carriage. Their hands touch briefly. And then as he walks away, he flexes his hand.
And I don't think she's wearing a glove either.
I don't think so either. Neither of them are wearing gloves. So it's like extra sexual. I'm sure that's how he sounded in his bedroom afterward.
Oh, absolutely. You know that he just went back and dear diary, we touched skin today. And then he wanked the entire evening.
Yeah. With that same hand that he touched Elizabeth's hand with. And we all know and love this. We talk about it as a community all the time. This is all you have to say, I want a Darcy hand flex. Everybody knows what you mean.
Instantly.
What it argues from the movie's perspective is that Darcy's feelings are physically manifesting. They are not to be contained. They can barely be contained. And therefore, by comparison, Jane Austen's version of Darcy is emotionally controlled to a fault. Mm-hmm. Whereas the movie version of Darcy is, you know what, I'm into it. Yeah. Is just can't contain all the manifestation of his emotions.
Quivering for half his lines. It's, and I do love it, but it's so funny when you really start thinking about it of he is very much not in control of his emotions. And he is so aware of his lack of control.
Yeah. And that is best conveyed in the rain proposal, which is another invention of this movie. We discussed it during the Wuthering Heights series, and that's because what did we talk about? We talked about rain, storms, conveying internal tumult, essentially. And so the interior, once again, becomes exterior in Darcy's case. His internal battle is now on display in the rain. And his line and the way he delivers it, you have bewitched me, body and soul, and I love you. He just can't I love you.
Yeah. He's already crying. He's already just I just love it. I mean, it's
and he
hard
has a little asymmetrical eye blink too.
How can you say no to that?
No, you can't. And
except she does.
She does. It's almost as good, if not better, than Austen's Darcy, which says, you must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. Oh, you've bewitched me, body and soul. Yeah, please. I'll take that any day.
Yeah.
Comparing these two versions of Darcy, Austen's Darcy ardently admires Elizabeth. That is someone who has been rational, who has talked himself into what his emotions mean and how to control them, versus Matthew McFadden's Darcy, bewitched body and soul. He's lost control. Elizabeth is, a sorceress. How dare she consume his life in this way? However, he's a willing participant. Those are two very different types of Darcys. Those are two very different ways of emotional control or lack thereof. And it changes Matthew McFadden's Darcy and his pride from being a moral flaw and rather just he's just romantically very intense, and he comes across as prideful because he doesn't know how to control his emotions, which isn't the real Darcy.
No, but we love him just the same.
Ugh, love him.
Now let's talk about Keira Knightley's Elizabeth. Also, the makeup artist claims that not a single actress wore makeup the entire movie. Did you know that? Like, the person who does makeup, she claims that, like, none of them had makeup on the entire movie.
I choose to not believe that.
Like, don't fucking lie to me. Don't lie to me. Tinted moisturizer, if that's what you did, counts as makeup.
Yeah.
I don't know. So Keira Knightley's Elizabeth is emotionally reactive in a way that's very visually compelling, but literarily, it's also interesting. The cinematography constantly returns to her face, because why not? Keira Knightley's face, she has a perfect upper lip watch, you know what I mean? And it really comes to her point of view. And it's echoing what the free indirect discourse does in the novel. Like, we're really coming from Elizabeth's point of view. Again, that's what free indirect discourse, like third person point of view, but narrowed.
Yeah, right. And the narration is so close to the character that it assumes the character's bias.
Yep. And so with Keira Knightley, we see the world through her emotional state. But that also means her errors are going to be softened. She's positioned as really essentially correct about Darcy from fairly early on, and her prejudice becomes more like a healthy skepticism versus an actual bias. So in the 2005 film with Keira Knightley, it lets Elizabeth off the hook a lot faster than Jane Austen lets Elizabeth off the hook. Her moment of self-reckoning is presented as pretty brief, so it is there, but it doesn't carry the weight of intellectual humiliation, really, that the novel gives. The BBC version makes that humiliation the climax, and the 2005 Keira Knightley version makes the dawn of the proposal, which is gorgeous, but that ends up being more of the climax of the story.
And is at the end of the movie.
I know, and then we're done. And then, although the final scene when they're at the lake at Pemberley, that was only the US version. The UK didn't see that.
That was only the US version. I did not see that until I was in college.
Wow.
I grew up without that.
You were denied.
I was denied.
So what this version thinks the novel is about is a love story. A beautiful, aching, elemental love story. And it trades Austen's irony for romantic feeling. It is very, very good at this. Like, it is very romantic, but it doesn't have Austen's witty tone to it. And of course, it's compressing things from 6 hours to 2 hours. So it has to, like, really force some choices, right? Like, the social critique ends up softening. Lady Catherine loses her class war edge. Like, a lot of other things ends up having to be sacrificed. Another wonderful quote. I could easily forgive his pride if he had not mortified mine. Such a great quote from the book, but do you get that mortified pride in this variation? The Keira Knightley's performance, I feel like personally, makes you think about it rather than like really feel it. You know what I mean? Like, you just kind of have this beautiful moment, but it doesn't have that reflection and that humiliation that is famous with Elizabeth. And it's not a failure. Like, it's not at all to say that this is done wrong. It's just a different argument that this movie is making than the novel.
Yeah, and I feel like, honestly, the letter and the revelation about Wickham isn't as heavy.
Yeah.
I often don't think about it, whereas I often think about the way Darcy breaks the fourth wall in the BBC version as he narrates his letter that he's writing. Like, that's a whole thing.
Yep. Now to go into one of our personal favorites, and it's kind of fitting that Amy is taking lead on this one.
Yep. So this is Pride and Prejudice, a latter-day comedy from 2003. I grew up watching this because I grew up in a Mormon household. They don't call themselves that anymore, so apologies for those of you who identify as a member of the Church of Latter-day Saints. However, I digress.
You're Mormons to me, forever and always. Sorry. I loved this movie too. I didn't realize it was Mormon until like several years in, and I was like, that makes sense why church was often mentioned.
Yes. There's so many things to love about this movie. So let me talk really quick about Darcy in this version. Darcy is emotionally reserved in a way that is coded as like a spirituality trait rather than an aristocratic trait. His transformation then from emotional reserve, his pride, is framed as humility before God and community. This makes it sound more religious than it is.
I didn't find him.
It's not really that religious. I will actually say I think his superiority comes across more as intellectual superiority.
Yeah.
His pride more as I'm British and studied at Oxford. And
it very much is like, I'm British, you're American kind of a pride.
Right. You're American and you're here at this who knows what college.
I feel like the movie actually takes a lot of pokes at Mormon religion too, and some of the beliefs and stuff, like the portrayal of Mr. Collins and having him be that very stereotypical Mormon missionary of like, God has deemed us to both have to get married and procreate, and that's why you should be with me, Elizabeth.
Yep, it definitely doesn't make sense unless you're familiar with Mormon culture, and Mormon culture especially in Utah or Arizona, where it feels very real to me. That is not Darcy. Darcy is external from all of that, which also gives him some level of superiority because he's not part of the crazy of small town Mormon culture.
Yeah. This Elizabeth is hilarious. First off, I mean, for a 2003 film, and even for now, I feel like it's a great feminist story. If it wasn't for the fact that it says Latter-day Saints, like, I would never assume that it's Latter-day Saints. Like, she's 26 and not married and was like, and I don't have plans to be. And I'm like, get it, girl. So Elizabeth's resistance is framed less as intellectual independence and more romantic idealism. And what she wants is genuine love. And it's not just a suitable match. It's not getting married just because that's what the church wants you to. She's holding out, and it's going to be for the right reasons. And in the meantime, our girl's trying to publish a book in this movie. You know, like, she's got more important things to do. And it's interesting because Austen's Elizabeth is both of those things simultaneously, right? But the LDS version separates them a little bit more. So with this LDS version, Elizabeth is, like I said, trying to get a book published, and she's very much putting everything she has into this book. She's constantly getting rejected, and I mean, not that constantly. She only gets a few rejection letters, and if you can't handle those rejection letters, babe, like, it's gonna be hard. And even when Darcy gives her notes on the book, because of course Darcy owns like one of the publishing companies that she reaches out to, and even when he gives her notes, she can't stand taking his notes. Like, she definitely struggles with an inferiority complex and thinking that she's not enough. That also kind of translates a little bit more romantically as well. And even though it's so different from Austen, I can see the links and why they made this interpretation of Elizabeth.
Yeah, especially when you consider the fact it's coming from the point of view of a culture that doesn't encourage women to be independent, right? Her character, you want her to succeed. A woman who is sharp, outspoken. She's outspoken, but she's not the cutting wittiness of Austen's Elizabeth, which makes her relatable, which makes her your heroine, which makes her someone you want to cheer for despite Darcy's, you know, sharp intellectualism and how he tries to cut her down. What is interesting then is between these two, how would I describe it? Darcy is intellectual and cautious, where she is like, wear her heart on her sleeve and optimistic, and they misread each other because of those traits. And then it takes time for them to level out and understand, oh, you're just, you know, careful. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. You're just careful. And, oh, you're just optimistic. That doesn't mean it's fake.
Yeah.
Right. And then they're able to come together. So not quite the whole Pride and Prejudice per se, but the assumption of pride and the assumption of prejudice.
A lot. Yeah. Assumption is a better fitting.
And like I kind of alluded to before, because this is an LDS adaptation, a Mormon adaptation, it's bringing the idea of Pride and Prejudice into a community set in Provo, Utah, that is entirely built around how quickly do you get married, the quality of the person you marry, what does that mean about like your religious persona and community interpretation of you and your life. By doing that, interestingly, parallels the urgency around marriage that we do get from Jane Austen's adaptation, which is not necessarily as prominent in the 2005 Keira Knightley version.
Yeah. I mean, I love it because it is such a big deal in the book, which is funny because because you don't have a Mrs. Bennet who's freaking out trying to get them married, which I feel like that would work perfectly for this adaptation because you'd want like, you know, Mormon mom who's like trying to get you to get married. But
yeah, but you don't need it in a culture that your divine worth is all determined upon how quickly you can get married and have babies.
Yep.
Right? That's Mrs. Bennet is religion substitutes Mrs. Bennet in this case.
Damn. And it's that element that you don't get in modern interpretations. Like, it doesn't make sense as much. And we're going to talk about the Bollywood version. And I think it nails this aspect too, where you have cultures that marriage is very important in the culture.
Yeah. And determines a woman's worth.
Yeah.
I think the other thing worth noting before we move any further related to the topic of culture, especially with this Mormon version, the one thing about growing up Mormon is that everybody is watching and judging all the time and comparing your actions and assuming judgment on, well, they're not going to get into heaven if they keep doing that, right? And that in and of itself becomes like Meriton, the gossipy, surveilling, you know, society that just wants something to talk about over high tea.
Yeah.
Now, let's ground this in Jane Austen's novel, quote, happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of chance, which honestly, I think personally does translate into the Mormon framework pretty well. But that's not the narrative anyone wants to tell you is what's actually happening, right? Everyone assumes there will be happiness because you're getting married instead of understanding your happiness in marriage is what you make of it, how you make it with your partner. Not so obvious all the time to, and I'm not trying to be hypercritical, but you guys, I grew up in this religion.
You can be hypercritical.
I am being hypercritical. They don't know what the fuck they're doing.
No. And I was not raised in the religion, but I have had a surprising amount of Mormon friends. And I grew up going to Sunday service and Mormon camp.
So you know.
I was
the pressure.
forced to write a letter to my future self in 4 years. We'll all be married. 20 years later, here I am.
Here I am, not married.
Can we come back to this letter, please?
I do think that what the Mormon version does lose, and this is a cultural thing, is the fact that Charlotte Lucas is very, very matter of fact and grounded when she says this, that happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of chance. This is not a grounding that the Keira Knightley version or the LDS version really have. It's actually one of my favorite parts of the LDS version is that Colin and Mary end up together.
Yeah.
Because that they are the same level of out of touch and they make a very happy couple. But that's a matter of chance. And we don't really get to see that in this version. What this adaptation does argue is that holding out for the right kind of love within this community instead of falling victim to its pressures is a positive thing, which maybe isn't a bad idea. I don't know. But, you know, Jane Austen, that wasn't what she was trying to get at. What she was trying to get at was more about how do two people break down their own bias to come together. That's not what this version is about.
And that's where it comes into, like, who is this adaptation talking to?
Yeah.
And that's very important to understand when you are watching something is who is this being marketed to? And that is an LDS audience plus a young Jack.
and a 14-year-old Mormon Amy.
Yeah. You know, like who's consuming this? That's the audience. And another version of who is consuming this film is a fan-fucking-tastic film. And that is the 2004 Bollywood version called Pride and Prejudice. And Amy, you hadn't seen it until I was like, we got to put this on.
Yeah, Jack made me watch it last week. And rightly so. I've known of its existence forever. I've not watched a lot of Bollywood, so I was unprepared. I knew there was singing in Bollywood. Was not prepared for how much singing was in this movie.
No wife. Oh, no life without wife. Banger after banger after banger. It is a great film. It has angst. It has Elizabeth and Darcy walking on the beach in faraway sides and then turning away from each other because they just can't handle being near one another. Oh my God. It is fantastic. So Will Darcy in this variation in Pride and Prejudice, he is an American wealthy, well-meaning and individual filtered through an American lens of Western romanticism, like Western feelings of romantic natures, that the film actively critiques his view on romance. And his arc isn't really about pride in the way that Austen portrays it or wrote it, it's about cultural assumption. And Will, Darcy, assumes that his version of a good life is the universal correct version. Will Darcy learns to see Lolita, who is Elizabeth, what she values ends up having a lot more meaning than what he thought was important and what he valued originally. So Darcy's flaws are not aristocracy, like it's not aristocratic rigidity, but a kind of a benevolent cultural imperialism. Again, even though America didn't colonize India, England did. However,
America is
got
still a colonizer.
It's still, I mean, like, even with businesses that go over and uses resources there, like, it's a different type of colonization.
Yeah.
And abuse and everything. But Darcy's growth, genuinely learning about the value of what he initially sees and views as lesser or backwards, that's his growth. That's his arc. And it ends up being a lot more politically explicit than Austen's Pride and Prejudice. The film is not subtle about what it's doing. Again, not a bad thing, just what's the goal of this film.
Right. And considering the time and its audience, it makes sense that a lot of the resistance that we see in Darcy and that we see in Lolita, who is Elizabeth, the resistance is ideological, right? Which I think was very relevant in 2004. It's not about I'm not attracted to white men, or I'm not attracted because you're a hotel owner. It's the principle of the fact that you are a colonizer coming to my small hometown, telling me that the big life in America and England and your 5-star hotels that have nothing to do with my culture are better than the small temples and the farms and the small community that we have that is rich with culture and tradition. And quite frankly, I'm on her side with this, right?
Yeah.
Her critique of Darcy and what he represents is very, very serious. That doesn't make her non-modern. She is a very modern, independent, and very intelligent woman. She also just happens to have a political position. And what I like about Lolita is that her sharpness, especially towards Darcy, it's not softened. It's not muted because we want to make sure she's likable. In fact, her argumentative nature is probably heightened in this case. And I think all of us are like, yeah, more power to you, lady. What that then means is her error in her judgment about Darcy or towards Darcy is also ideological. She looks at him only through the lens of what does he represent, not actually who is he as a person, which I would say in line with Jane Austen's characters of like, what does this person represent? Oh, all the snooty aristocrats of noble birth who think that they are more gentlemen than my father, who is also a gentleman.
Yeah. So a little bit more about this version of the novel and, just ways to think about it. Pride and Prejudice is directed by Gurinder Chadha. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced that. But they also made Bend It Like Beckham, another fantastic book. Another fantastic movie. And its central argument is that Pride and Prejudice is about collision between tradition and modern, between collective family values and individual romantic choices. And that turns out to be a much older and a much more globally resonating tension that goes beyond Regency England. And honestly, Regency England does not have a monopoly on these feelings. Lolita is Indian, modern, independent-minded, and her friction with Darcy is immediately cross-cultural. That is their argument between one another right off the bat. Darcy is American, wealthy, and he means well, but is also very blinded and not very smart. And it comes through the American lens of Western romanticism. And their conflict is not just about first impressions. It's about whose version of the world is correct.
Yeah. And before I jump into my next section, what I think it really does well is capture the assumptions of both what it means to be white in a non-white society and what the non-white society assumes about the white person. I think it does it really well, having grown up in China, having seen a lot of these forces play out around me. And it is a tension that is very real and has to be dealt with in real life situations. Quite frankly, ignorance on the white person's part, right? Again, no offense, but in my view goes back to the Mormons as well. And when they send missionaries out into the world, like you assume you're bringing something really good to these people.
Yeah.
That I think their life is fine without it. Are you sure they want that?
Yeah.
Anyway, I digress again. So what I think Chada does really, really well is, in addition to the cultural aspect of this, is show the social pressure that is not uniquely English or Regency era, right? It's common in many cultures for there to be social pressure around marriage. And in the case of Pride and Prejudice, the Bakshi family's marriage anxiety is very, very aligned with the Bennett families in terms of what it means to be married or not to be married and your family's ability to survive. What Pride and Prejudice does well is it maps the contemporary experience for the audience of marriage and its consequences, positive and negative, with that of what historically we know to be true about the Regency era. Mrs. Bakshi, Lolita's mother, aka the Mrs. Bennet of this story, feels a lot of urgency around her daughters being married, and even though it's very culturally specific, it is still very relevant to a lot of women in society, regardless of the society that they're in. What I think is also worth noting is, while I was unaccustomed to the Bollywood musical aspect of this movie, it's not just accessory. It's not just decoration. It's actually doing the narrative irony work of Austen's novel, but in musical form. And I actually really, really enjoy that. It also does something that I think is unique in that it functions as a substitute for the Meryton Assembly and for the society gossip that we get to see throughout Austen's novel. We now see it take place in musical form because there's a lot of community gathering in Bollywood numbers.
So good. We are going to bring in another quote as we wrap this section down. And that quote is, "It's a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." Classic opener. And it is so ironic because, you know, the concept of universally acknowledged, right? Like that is the tell to know that this is being ironic. And Pride and Prejudice takes the content of that line very seriously across cultures, right? It's the social truth of it really holds up, even when the irony is stripped away. So even though this, like, you know, the haha of like, oh my God, there's a young man who's single and hot and wealthy is next door, he must want a wife. The concept still holds, right? Like, even though it's being funny, it's actually, you know, it's a truth that is universal potentially. And that's a very revealing move. It shows the truth beneath the satire is in fact real and it is in fact global. Where the adaptation gets interesting, I mean, it's been interesting this entire time, but it's less interested in Austen's epistemological critique and more in her social anthropology. If you guys remember that via first episode that we did of Pride and Prejudice, we kind of broke that down a little bit more. So it's a joyful film. The film itself is joyful, and that joy is partially because it treats that the marriage plot is meaningful and not just a vehicle for irony. Chada's argument, which we are interpreting, I'm not saying that this was their argument, but essentially is that this is a story about two people finding each other across the gap between worlds. And Austen, I feel like, would add, learning to see each other clearly while doing it.
All right. For our last visual film movie, YouTube in this case, adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, we're going to talk about the Lizzie Bennet Diaries from 2012 to 2013. Did not know about these until Jack showed me again this weekend.
It's so good.
It is very, very clever. So let me start by talking about Darcy, who quite frankly doesn't show up until pretty late in the series.
Sorry, before you should tell them what the premise of it is.
Okay. The premise of it is Lizzie Bennet is doing a vlog. She's a graduate student in mass communications. This is part of her thesis for her degree. She's doing basically weekly vlogs on YouTube. Again, this is 2012, back when vlogs were starting to become really a thing that people cared about. And what happens is Charlotte Liu, not Charlotte Lucas, Charlotte Liu is her buddy, her best friend, helping with the production of this. Her sisters, Lydia and Jane, come in and out as guest appearances, and chaos ensues as Bing Lee and his friend Will Darcy move into town. They encounter a Mr. Collins, who is a former grade school friend, who's now in the communications world and backed by a venture capitalist, Miss Catherine de Bourgh.
You have Wickham.
George Wickham is a swim coach who comes into town. There's a lot of chaos. They go to VidCon at one point.
But it's all done through a vlog style.
Yes, all through a vlog style. Sometimes Lydia and Jane hijack the vlog and Lizzie doesn't know. Sometimes Charlotte hijacks the vlog and Lizzie doesn't know.
Lydia has her own vlog that's entirely separate too, which we didn't even watch.
Yeah. And then there's often Lizzie does impersonations of people like her mother. You never see Mrs. Bennet, but you definitely get her Southern Belle interpretation from Lizzie's point of view. Mm-hmm. So lots of hilarity. Highly recommend it. However, it is 100 episodes long from 3 to 4 minutes each. Darcy doesn't show up till maybe episode 60.
Yeah.
Pretty late. And that means we get Darcy's story and his appearance in her life entirely through Lizzie's lens. We only get it through her interpretation of what's going on. And Jane, Lydia, Charlotte, they all try to correct her and she's like, no, you're wrong. This is how it really went. So by the time we actually see him on camera, 60% of the way through the series, we already have an opinion of him. Whether or not that's actually correct, we don't know. He is less intimidating. You know, he's not an aristocrat, as Jack likes to say. He's got a touch of the tism. He's awkward. He comes across as very like, why am I on camera? I feel very uncomfortable.
He's got more than the touch, this variation.
I don't want that to come across as rude, but I think you guys will understand that this man doesn't know how to operate very comfortably in society when you see him on camera.
Basically, she has done this like very intense dramatic version of him, like in her storytelling. Mm-hmm. And the actor decides to portray him exactly to the way that she would portray him, which is ridiculous within itself.
Yep. And he always wears a bow tie and a beret and sometimes suspenders. Like it's getting a little bit much. His growth, though, is shown in his willingness to appear on the vlog at all, thereby entering her world, honestly making himself vulnerable to her audience rather than demanding that she enter his world.
It is interesting because there are no flaws really with this Darcy. Like you don't get his pride really. It goes very easy on this Darcy. Mm-hmm. Elizabeth, on the other hand, is a different story. Take it away, Amy.
So Lizzie, on the other hand, is maybe the most interesting adaptation of Elizabeth because, quite frankly, I feel like it is the most obvious critique of Elizabeth as a character. The vlog format we know is making her an unreliable narrator. Like we feel that in her descriptions and the way everyone else in her life is trying to correct her. She very obviously narrates her life in a way that suits her idea of what's going on in her understanding of the world. We know actively she's wrong. Jane and Lydia have a whole episode to themselves where they talk about her being wrong. So do Lydia and Charlotte. Like, it happens a lot. And what that means, though, is that we as the audience understand throughout the series how much Lizzie's invested in her own story about herself and how she's making her way through the world. Her prejudice against Darcy is being built in real time for the viewer, and we are able to see as the viewer as she's constructing that bias. Therefore, her moment of self-reckoning is the most effective of any adaptation because we watched her paint herself into a corner. Mm-hmm. And we see her painting herself in her corner, and then it all falls apart. She ultimately doesn't have to correct her own view of Darcy. She has to correct the view of herself that she has as a narrator. What this version does is the vlog itself creates this free indirect discourse that was in the novel more literal because we get to see inside Lizzie's perspective by design because it's her vlog. She's narrating her life. We know she's unreliable, and therefore we know either intentionally sharing her bias or we're intentionally trying to avoid her bias. Darcy, appearing late in the series, and therefore only on camera after significant context has been built, means that the free indirect discourse has already made us biased against him, biased in favor of Lizzie's narration of him. It's only when he's on screen that that bias proceeds to be deconstructed.
This adaptation is probably the most risky format I have seen any adaptation take, to be honest. And I really, really feel like the risk pays off in ways that are not just interesting from a literary standpoint, interesting all around. The constraint is that Lizzie can only show us, right? Like we don't get to actually be there for these moments. We don't get to see it in film. We don't get to read it. She is there to give us the narrative of what happens. And she's also posting it publicly, which creates a structural parallel to Austen's own constraints, right? That we only know what Elizabeth knows. That is such a great thing, right? Like, I don't think you guys understand how clever that is. We know everything because we are getting Elizabeth's filtered version of this. It is the most accurate, unreliable narrator depiction that we can get. We do get to see Wickham. He is charming on camera. He performs for the vlog. You can sense how slimy he is. This is like an adaptation of Wickham performs socially. He is performing for social media. The adaptation uses audience parasocial relationship with Lizzie to replicate the novel's emotional manipulation, right? We are rooting for Lizzie. We trust Lizzie. We trust her reading of Darcy. And then when she's wrong, we're wrong. Except, we're not wrong because we know what happens because we know it's Pride and Prejudice. But you get the general vibes. The audience is kind of its own character too, because all of this is pre-written and scripted and recorded, but she talks to the audience saying, I know you guys have been wanting me to say this. I know this is what you were asking for last time. And it's obviously not, so the audience is its own character too. And then the Lydia subplot is my favorite. Lydia's subplot, not only because it moves into its own spin-off series, but because of Lydia's narrative of her public persona versus her private vulnerability. I think it humanizes Lydia so much more. And Lydia's downfall in Austen is also a gap between performance and reality, of performance of Lydia just being this show pony of I can do whatever I want and isn't everything just for a laugh, and then the reality of she could lose everything. And you have that here too of Lydia's performing for the video and then she ends up having a sex tape potentially leaked. What was what Wickham does to her. All right, so that is Lizzie Bennet. Obviously there's going to be a lot of, I can just hear people screaming, what about Bridget Jones? What about all these other ones? I know. So that's why we have rapid fire honorable mentions.
All right, so Bridget Jones's Diary, 2001. What if the reader who misreads Darcy is the protagonist? The beauty of Colin Firth making a reappearance as Darcy in this film is chef's kiss. Bridget is the audience surrogate. Taken into its logical conclusion, Elizabeth's prejudice is exaggerated into full comic self-delusion, and it is accurate. I'm just so shocked Colin Firth agreed to play Darcy.
I know. It was perfect.
But I love it.
I love it. Perfect. It's almost like I'm devastated that Daisy Wrigley is not playing Love Hypothesis, but her husband is.
Her husband is. Yeah.
It is oddly perfect for that one. Also, honorable mentions, we have Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. We see that there's so many other variations of films and movies that we could go into, but we're not. What's funny though are different book variations that have kind of popped up. A really famous one is Longbourn by Joe Baker, and this is a novel, not a film. And this one kind of fucked me up. It's a retelling from one of the servants' perspectives in the Bennet household. This is only the servants' story. Elizabeth and everything is happening in the background, but it actually talks a lot about the social structure and social class in a way that you kind of think oh, Austen did not get into it. And it's a great book. It's a bummer in the sense of oh no, Elizabeth walking through the mud. In the book we're oh, she's so free and we love Elizabeth. She just is willing to walk in the mud. But then in the book it's oh, I hate when Elizabeth walks in the mud because I have to get this all clean and my hands are rubbed raw because I'm trying to get the mud stains out.
Yeah, it's brutal.
Yeah.
That oh, even Elizabeth is privileged.
Very. So we're going to continue talking a little bit about variations. We talked about films and shows and their takes on Pride and Prejudice, but there is also entirely separate phenomenon happening in the literary world. It's huge. It's its own genre. It is Pride and Prejudice variations. It's one of my favorite things. It's what I do at the beginning of the year is I listen to Pride and Prejudice and then I go, I'm not done yet. And then I follow up with 10 variations. It's its own industry within itself. There are hundreds of these books, arguably maybe even thousands, and if you count the self-published versions, and they are so popular. This is also where it starts to get into the whole how do we feel about fan fictions? And I'm This is also essentially like a whole genre of fan fiction, but we're only accepting it because she's dead. And it's
and it's traditionally published.
And it's a lot of these are traditionally published too, of the variations. Yeah.
So one category, and honestly one of my favorite categories of adaptations, are sequels. What happens after the novel ends? Death Comes to Pemberley by P.D. James. It is a murder mystery set at Pemberley years into Darcy and Elizabeth's marriage. There is a fantastic TV version adaptation of this very
have you watched it?
It is so good.
I actually didn't like the novel.
Oh, but the TV version, excellent.
Maybe I'll watch that while I do my taxes tonight.
You might not get your taxes done. There's a sex scene with Darcy and Elizabeth at the end.
Oh, I won't. Oh, I'll pause.
One of my other favorite novel adaptations, Mr. Darcy's Diary, where we get the story of Pride and Prejudice from Darcy's perspective in his diary. It's told retroactively. Fantastic. Love getting his perspective, because all we get in Pride and Prejudice is Elizabeth's perspective.
It's just so freaking good. And then you do have the perspective shifts, right? You have the Longbourn, which is told from one of the servants. Sarah, one of her, I'm like, is Sarah real or not? I can't remember. And then you also have novels that are told from Jane's point of view, Lydia's point of view, even Charlotte's point of view. And each one of those exposes what Elizabeth's narration doesn't show you, right? So like Charlotte's variations are so many times, again, like I had to do a lot of summaries. I haven't read a lot of these, so this is like me gathering internet information here, but a lot of consensus is that her point of view is very rich because it goes into her choice to marry Collins, and it looks completely different when she's the protagonist. And the perspective shift variations are great and essentially literary criticism in novel form. So they're asking the question of like, okay, well, what did we miss then if we're not with Elizabeth and Darcy, or even with Elizabeth only?
Yeah. Another adaptation category, and I think Jack has read some of these. I have not.
These are my favorite variations.
If you change one thing in Pride and Prejudice and then tell the story, how does it play out? So, for example, what if Elizabeth had accepted Darcy's first proposal?
Read one of those.
What if Wickham's deception never was exposed? What if the Bennet sisters had economic options and the estate wasn't going to be entailed from them? Like, there's a lot of what if stories that you could play out, which is a lot of fun.
Some of them are bummers and I refuse to read it. Like, there's a couple of like, what if Elizabeth got married and her husband died? What if 20 years went by and now they're both single? There was one that I read this year of what if Elizabeth inherited a bunch of money and now she's richer than Darcy? Like, my favorite ones are like, what if Elizabeth accepted his proposal the first time? I eat those up. And if they're smutty, I will say a lot of these are not explicit, are not smutty, and that's how I went like a month this year without having read a single sex scene. It was a rough month. Actually, it was great, but like when I got to my first sex scene after that, I was like, oh, I'm home.
And I'll just mention last one, which is mashups, the best example of which is Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which is Pride and Prejudice literally written with zombies in it. We all know what that is.
Oh, and then there's like, I don't even know where this lands, but I also rewatched, time travel variations, right? So there's Lost in Austen, which is a TV series, and it is really good. There is not a single variation that I have been able to find of Lost in Austen where she sings downtown, and it's really freaking funny. And I don't think they got the copyrights to it because I can't find it anywhere, but it's really freaking funny. It also, so a woman goes from this world, goes into Jane Austen Pride and Prejudice book, and it's really great. So what I love about the genre variation, as everything of this genre, is what it tells us about why the people love these books, right? So the sequels, they say, we don't want the story to end. The perspective shifts. They say, we know something that's being hidden from us and we want to know what it is. And then the what ifs are kind of saying, we want to understand how it works by breaking it, and then the mashups are essentially us being like, we want feelings without the historical distance. And every category, all of the relationships it has with the text, all of it confirms that Austen really created something that people can't stop living it. And I think I've read like maybe 8 variations this year, and I'm probably going to do more because talking about it's making me want to go do more.
From a literary standpoint, this is actually a really valuable conversation because each variation in a lot of ways functions as criticism of the original book, not in a way that is critical of the book, but it interrogates what Pride and Prejudice is about and how do we want to dissect it from different points of view. By departing from the original novel, it illuminates something that maybe we didn't spend enough time looking at.
Mm-hmm.
This happens very well with Longbourn by Joe Baker, which Jack had mentioned. The perspective shift to the servant helps illuminate, some of the class elements of Pride and Prejudice that we don't spend enough time thinking about.
Honestly, guys, we could just keep going about this. Like, this could be its own series. I mean, we haven't even gone into earlier adaptations, like from the 1940s. We haven't even gone into other adaptations like Fire Island, which is another great queer retelling. There genuinely is so many that we're missing. I'm sorry we haven't talked about all of it. Maybe one day we'll do a round 2 of this, but that day is not today.
Maybe we'll do it when I publish my adaptation of Pride and Prejudice.
That would be great.
So that wraps up today's episode. And if you remember nothing from this, at least remember this, that Pride and Prejudice has been probably adapted more than any other novel in the English language because it's not a story with a fixed, defined answer that can only be answered one way. At the end of the day, it's a story about what does it take to overcome bias to find your happily ever after.
And it's also another takeaway that we want you guys to remember is that each generation answers a question and it tackles a different aspect of the novel. And, we talked about 1995, we talked about the 2005, we talked about the 2012. Like, there's different aspects that each variation wants you to look at. And that's what you're doing when you're consuming this. And that's why not every single variation is going to be one that you love or be completely faithful unless it's going to be like another 8-hour version of it. But even then, there's going to have to be some shifting, some adaptation.
What I think is an interesting point to think about is that every version of Darcy we see throughout the ages is probably the version of Darcy that people of that era want as their own partner. Right? 2005 was not about the prideful Darcy. It was about the emotionally restrained Darcy who was about to explode, right? Mm-hmm. It's about the Darcy who's willing to come into your vlogs and be part of your world, which makes Austen's Darcy, maybe the least fantastical of all the Darcys. It's Austen's Darcy. The true Darcy is a man who is genuinely wrong, but also is able to call out Elizabeth on how she is wrong. And together they have to accept they aren't always right, learn how to be more humble, and then grow together.
The adaptations are going to keep coming. There's another Netflix one that's coming out, which I'm so freaking excited about. Again, there will not be an adaptation that I don't love, but it's going to keep asking the questions, the different questions, and the answer, Austen's answer, I feel like has never changed. And if you don't remember those answers, go back and listen to episode 1 and 2. And that is that. Let's wrap it up. Thank you for listening to this episode of Book Talk for Book Talk with Jac and Amy. Next week, we will be discussing Pride and Prejudice with maybe a special guest. We shall see.
If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps other readers find us. And of course, we'd love to hear what you thought of today's episode. Share your comments through our forum at booktalkforbooktalk.com, and we might feature your feedback in a future mini episode or in a Patreon exclusive episode.
For merch and more ways to support the show, head to booktalkforbooktalk.com. You can also follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at the handle BookTalk for BookTalk. And don't forget to join us by subscribing to the Subtext Society Journal.substack.com to get more insights into the romantasy and romance world. Bye.
Bye.